Fifth difference: was Paul, who never met Jesus, appointed by God to interpret Jesus' message? The Bible depicts Paul as the primary authority on Jesus' message, despite the fact that Paul never met Jesus. The Bible asserts that Paul received revelations after Jesus' death, and then legitimately used them to override the teachings of Jesus' disciples. Disciples that Jesus personally taught during his life, including Peter. Paul claims that even though he never personally met Jesus, he received revelations after Jesus' death. In Galatians we read, "For I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel that was proclaimed by me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from a human source, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." In 2 Corinthians we read, "It's necessary to boast. Nothing is to be gained by it. But I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that such a person, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. Was caught up into paradise and heard things that are not to be told, that no mortal is permitted to repeat." Paul then describes how he used his revelations to override the views of Jesus' actual disciples like Peter and Jesus' brother James, who was the head of the Jerusalem church. In Galatians we read, "But when Cephas, i.e. Peter, came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood self-condemned. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles, but after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. And the other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews?" The Quran rejects such a view. It makes no mention of Paul and does not attribute to Paul any authority. Rather, the Quran only mentions the disciples that served under Jesus during his life, depicting them as helping him spread his monotheistic message. In the Quran we read, "You who believe, be God's helpers, as Jesus son of Mary said to the disciples, who will come with me to help God? The disciples said, we shall be God's helpers. Some of the children of Israel believed and some disbelieved. We supported the believers against their enemy, and they were the ones who came out on top." We also read, when Jesus realized they still did not believe, he said, "Who will help me in God's cause?" The disciples said, "We will be God's helpers. We believe in God. Witness our devotion to him." Conclusion. An important feature of the Quran is that it omits and rejects much problematic material in the Bible. For instance, it omits and rejects the many overt polytheistic passages found in the Old Testament, such as Psalms 82, Psalm 86, Psalm 97, and Exodus 15 and Psalm 45. In a similar vein, the Quran omits and rejects biblical material which depicts prophets and other holy individuals in a negative or insulting way. For example, the Quran omits and rejects Old Testament claims such as Lot engaging in drunken incest with his daughters, or Jacob tricking Esau out of his birthright, or that Moses ordered the intentional killing of children, or that David committed adultery, or that Solomon engaged in idol worship. Just as the Quran omits and rejects problematic material from the Old Testament, it does likewise with material from the New Testament. The Quran rejects New Testament material which suggests that Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet, that Jesus preached a confusing polytheistic message, that Jesus was a racist rabbi, that Jesus' mission was to be a human sacrifice, and that Paul was appointed by God after Jesus as the authoritative interpreter of Jesus' teachings. Just as the Quran presents a far more respectful depiction of figures like Lot, Jacob, Moses, David, and Solomon, it likewise presents a far more respectful, consistent, and thus superior depiction of Jesus Christ.